Hare Krishna. So thank you for joining us, and we'll begin the discussion on Canto 3, Chapter 22. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudiraye shunvatam swakata krishnaha punyashravana kirtanaha hridiyantah stohi abhadrani vidunoti suhrit satam Nashtaprayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. So in today's class, the predominant theme for this chapter, there are several themes, but the first most important theme, it has to do with the arrangements made by the Lord for his pure devotees. In other words, there's particularly significant, and we have been discussing this for the last 2 weeks, is the fact that there are two different events that are occurring. One is the desire of Shri Kardama Muni, and he is desiring to get married. And the moment he is being asked to participate in the Grihastha ashram, he immediately seeks to go away for austerities. He performs austerities, and then the austerities themselves are in the process of Ashtanga yoga. And the ultimate result of Ashtanga yoga is samadhi, which is to literally come face to face with the Lord and to be able to have a conversation with him. In other words, being able to actually manifest the Lord in one's eyes. It's just samadhi, that is trance. Being in a trance, being in a situation which is transcendental. The word trance comes from being transcendental. Now, the samadhi position is such that one needs to be equipoised. And this is being spoken by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, especially the second chapter, where Krishna basically says that one whose mind is fixed, one whose mind is not agitated. So the whole process of Ashtanga yoga, we spoke before, talks about establishing equanimity, establishing equipoise in the mind, and by establishing equipoise, which is the idea of being able to control the senses and to be able to have a mind which is in a tranquil state, which is basically calm, peaceful, it is not being agitated. So the whole process starts with following basic rules and regulations, and then it comes all the way down to being able to ensure that we are able to hold on to our senses and be able to do that. Then comes concentration, because one cannot concentrate without being able to subdue the senses. Then you have dhyana, which is meditation, because one can't really meditate. And then finally, being able to fix the image of the Lord in the heart, one then manifests the Lord. So this is a whole process which is being followed. It was appropriate for this age, the age of Sri Kardama Muni. But we also have a similar process in Krishna consciousness for our own disabilities, one would say, in Kali Yuga. Because in Kali Yuga, we don't have the ability to concentrate. We don't have the ability to actually have a process that depends on our skills. So we are Kripa Siddhas, and for Kripa Siddha, the whole process depends on how we position ourselves to receive mercy. Positioning ourselves to receive mercy is the process of sadhana bhakti. So it then starts with Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, of being able to accept a spiritual master, submit ourselves, and then serving the spiritual master, and then receiving grace through the mercy of the spiritual master, because we have rendered service. As a consequence, we draw mercy. So Bhakti Devi, from the heart of the spiritual master, enters into the devotee's heart, the disciple's heart, through the process of Srimad-Bhagavatam, where the devotee, the disciple, is able to audibly receive the instructions of the spiritual master. One of the most important aspects of understanding whether we are ready in the process of bhakti, whether are we really ready, even in terms of, for example, accepting a guru. If some of us are not initiated, then this might be a good checkpoint. Are we really ready for us to be able to accept a guru? Is to see if we can actually follow instructions. Are we able to eagerly listen and then follow instructions? If you're able to listen to a specific personality who is inspiring you in Krishna consciousness. And at the same time, you're able to adapt to those instructions and you're trying to change life based on those instructions, we are pretty much ready. So it's not so much a matter of 16 rounds. It is not so much a matter of a certain mindset. It has more to do with the internal construct of being able to accept instructions. And while you accept instructions, you're also basically stepping aside and allowing the spiritual master to direct your life. So everything centers around the instructions of the spiritual master. What is it that I can do to please him? Now, that is a position where one is ready to begin spiritual life. And that is when organically the process of Krishna consciousness would bring us in touch with the Guru, would ensure that we are receiving whatever is required. And then all kinds of wonderful arrangements are being made organically. It is not an extraneous process. It is not a process where one needs to force themselves onto. It's just basically a process that occurs organically, just as much as we come in touch with Nam, we receive inspiration through Nam, come in touch with the Sangha of devotees, we get inspired by a few Siksha gurus. One of them becomes a Diksha guru because he has the capacity to, inspire us. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Kuryakya. Now, this is a very important principle. And then in Ashtanga Yoga, Kardama Muni practically followed the same principle of being able to follow the instructions and center himself on bringing the Lord into his heart. In his objective, he was very clear. His objective was, there was humility. And this is extraordinary in Kardama Muni. I'm repeating it because if a person is not powerful, for them to be humble, recognizing their humility, recognizing their nature of not having the resources for them to be able to be authoritarian with others, that's a natural position because there is either poverty, there's either a physical condition which is not very powerful and one can be subdued, or there are circumstances that are extraordinarily overwhelming. But contrast this with Sri Kardama Muni. Kardama Muni was an extraordinarily powerful yogi. He was a mystic. And he was directly in touch with the Gunavataras. He was directly in touch with Krishna's servants, personal servants. He was receiving instructions which are directly connected to what Krishna aspired for the world. And here was this very powerful yogi who could create an entire universe through his yogic power, who had the humility to understand that I need to bring the Lord into my heart so that he could appropriately situate me so that I would not be distracted. It's a very powerful position to have that kind of humility. That is, when you have resources, when you have power, but then you realize that the source of all power is Krishna. This is reality. This is humility in action. This is what was observed with Arjuna. So not having anything and groveling before others, that is possible. That's an easy task. For most of us, that's the position because we are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But then if you're so powerful that you're almost a demigod, and then you practically have the ability to submit yourself, and then you have the state of dependence, this is a Vaishnava quality of being able to depend on Krishna. So he sits and he's basically in meditation, and then Krishna appears, Lord Vishnu appears. And when he appears, when Lord Vishnu appears in the four-arm form, because he is the Paramatma, because the Ashtanga yogi is concentrating in the region of the heart, so the Paramatma realization occurs first in the heart, and then there's a manifestation physically. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the Paramatma will always manifest in the four-arm form. It's not necessary. The manifestation of the Paramatma can occur based on our affinity towards a certain manifestation of the Lord. So someone is very attached to Narasimhadev, and Narasimhadev would appear as the deity sitting in the heart. Someone is very, very attached to the divine couple. They would appear because their heart basically is becoming ready. The lotus in the heart is actually starting to bloom. As it blooms through the process of sadhana bhakti, all these wonderful qualities would be externally manifest, but then internally, the seat of the heart becomes ready to receive the lotus feet of the Lord. So the Lord then starts manifesting in this heart. And then the Lord, as he manifests in the heart, then he has the ability to appear in the front. So it's from the heart first, then physically in front. So Kardama Muni was able to concentrate and bring the Lord into his heart. He could visually meditate on the divine qualities of the Lord. And after meditating on the divine qualities of the Lord, the same facility, he was able to actually bring the Lord out. The Lord practically was also able to manifest externally. So this is quite fascinating to see that the ability of the great sage to surrender is just extraordinary. So which means that the quality of love had already been attained. He was already in love with the Lord. The quality of surrender follows love. So he was efficient in his surrender. So he was practically wanting to depend on Krishna's arrangement. He practically goes, and then within his sphere of what he could do, he follows the process of surrender. And then Krishna manifests. Now, on the same hand, an arrangement has already been made with Swayambo or Manu. Now, we have to understand the personality of Swayambo or Manu. It is extraordinary because the character description of these different personalities is extraordinary. He had a lifespan of 71 times 4,032,000 years. It's basically 4,320,000 years. He practically had a lifespan of 4,320,000 years. He practically, multiplied by 71. Yeah, multiplied by 71. So you practically can see that, it is actually 432,000 multiplied by 71. One yuga cycle, if you were to break it down to one yuga cycle, it's 432,000 times 71. So that was his lifespan. And it is said in this chapter that throughout his lifespan, he was actually meditating on the Lord. He was constantly remembering the Lord in different circumstances. So it appears that when there are two individuals who are dependent on the Lord and who are meditating on the Lord all the time, Krishna practically becomes the connector. He is practically manifesting the reality of their desires because he's in the heart. Krishna is in the heart. He's fully manifest in the hearts of these devotees. Both of them are extraordinary because they're devotees. And they're constantly remembering Krishna. They're constantly remembering Vishnu, which is Krishna. And as they remember Krishna, and even though they haven't met physically, and they are miles away, or you can say that the distance between them, physical distance between them is quite intense. Even though they are not able to meet physically, Krishna has somehow or the other made this extraordinary connection. He has brought two of his devotees together. So Swayambo Manu, who practically rules over one Manvantara, and one Manvantara is basically 71 yuga cycles. I may have gotten the arithmetic wrong. I'll confirm that in a bit. But 71 yuga cycles, 71 times the four different yugas, 4, 3, 2, and 1, which is Satya, Dwapara, Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali. Yeah. So 71 times. Now, the beauty is that as he is meditating on the Lord, he is also functioning as a king, which is quite extraordinary. Lord Chaitanya rejects Prataprudra, Maharaj Prataprudra, who is the king of Odisha, that particular region when Lord Chaitanya was on the planet. He rejects him. And why is it so? He is rejecting him because he is of the royal order. Why is Lord Chaitanya rejecting the king? He is rejecting the king and he does not want to offer an audience because it's very difficult for a king to subdue his false ego. He already thinks he is God. Can you imagine? Wherever he goes, the king is practically receiving attention, which is extraordinary. And for such a person to be able to accept authority, it's very difficult. And he is constantly involved in manifesting his rajas because the mode of passion for someone who is ruling a state is quite intense because it's a very complex activity. When activity becomes very complex and there are too many details to be taken care of, then passion has to be there. Otherwise, you can't manage all these things. It's very difficult. So passion starts manifesting. When passion starts manifesting, then one becomes a little degraded in terms of being able to recognize authority. Yeah, they become more filled with false pride. Yeah, passion can influence the mode of goodness. So there can be a mixed mode of passion and goodness. When mixed mode of passion and goodness exists, even as devotees who advance, they start seeking name, fame, glory, etc. Yeah, this is a disease where pure passion induces one to seek attachments in the world. They are bothered by things that are either happening or not happening in the world. This is pure passion. Something is not working out because they are particularly passionate about what their ideas are. They become highly disturbed because passion can be very painful. because there are so many desires because of passion. And then there's so much stimulation in the atmosphere, and all these desires want fulfillment. But in reality, you can't fulfill all those desires because there isn't what we would call the credits or the resources for us to be able to fulfill desires. So people in passion, or I would say nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Abhadreshu is passion and ignorance. But sometimes in devotional service, as we make progress, we are going from this mixed situation of passion, ignorance, goodness, sometimes being dominated by ignorance, sometimes dominated by passion and ignorance, sometimes dominated by passion and goodness. We're going through all these changes while we're engaging in anartha nivritti. So the bhajana kriya that we do, kriya, we are basically engaging in bhajana kriya. And as we engage in bhajana kriya, we are practically trying to ascend. We are trying to basically rise ourselves above the material modes. However, the difficulty is, it's very difficult to recognize something that's very subtle. The more sublime, the more subtle, the more difficult it becomes for us to be able to recognize an issue. Yeah. The more subtle an issue, more difficult. So as a consequence, even for a practicing devotee, there are difficulties in being able to recognize that their mode of goodness is actually interspersed and in touch with passion. Yeah, because passion can come in touch with the mode of goodness. And as a consequence, they develop desires of wanting recognition. They develop desires of wanting name, fame, etc. They may not desire what we would call the gross aspects of passion, of wanting to engage in gross sense gratification. They may not desire that, but it has taken on a subtle form. Then power becomes an issue. So there's name, fame, recognition, wanting to manage issues, manage power. This is quite common in spiritual circles because the mode of goodness now is in touch with passion. And as a consequence, there are attachments and there are necessities to fulfill that particular desire. And there's a lot of desire of wanting to have recognition, which is nothing but passion. Passion basically induces one to make one feel, wanting recognition. Pure goodness is where you're completely free. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. For most part, you're completely free. There's very little prarabdha left just to keep the soul within the body. For pure devotees, there is prarabdha because you are in a physical body and you can't exist in the physical body unless there is some prarabdha. So some prarabdha is retained by the pure devotee just to remain in touch with the physical body and to be cognizant of the environment. But then, as we make progress from our contaminated state, conditioned state, to the pure state, the mode of passion is in touch with mode of goodness. This practically makes one a devotee who is a practitioner, who could be serious, who can do wonderful things in terms of Krishna consciousness, but then they would have deep desires of wanting to be recognized, wanting to be patted on the back. And you notice this in a lot of situations. And then when that doesn't happen, then there are other complications that come because then the degradation stops. So this is to be recognized. That's why a king is someone who is constantly being centered as the king of the universe. A king of a certain place is going to be glorified by his people as being the king of the universe. And this is the case of Prataprudra. He was practically the king of that particular area which covered Jagannath Puri. And Mahaprabhu did not want to give him an audience because he practically felt that he had to see if a certain change occurs in him where he is able to make a shift. Then when Prataprudra becomes submissive and picks up a broom and then cleans the road in front of Jagannath, which means he's accepting the authority of Jagannath even above him, that is when Mahaprabhu basically gives him an audience. Mahaprabhu's heart basically melts at that particular point. The point we're trying to make is that for a king who is involved in managing complexity, the mode of passion is going to interfere with the mode of goodness because passion is going to be required to some level. If they can't control passion, they can't subdue the passion and then control it through the mode of goodness, then they're going to have trouble. So one needs to be transcendentally situated. So Swayambo Manu was transcendentally situated. He was a Raja Rishi, which means internally there's deep humility. Externally, he has to function as a king. So there's an authority which is being exuded as a king. He's functioning as a king. Internally, there's deep humility where he's dependent on the Lord for the function of even marrying off his daughter. It's quite significant. Someone in authority who is practically the king of the universe would practically feel that they have all the authority and all the intelligence and all kinds of, what I would call as facilities for them to take decisions. They wouldn't be dependent on the Lord. It's very, very difficult for people with great power and position to develop this particular nature of Trinadapi Sunichena. It's very, very difficult. We have issues with Trinadapi Sunichena, but then we got to realize someday we have to wake up and realize that we are highly, highly insignificant. Highly insignificant. Oftentimes we worry about this little virus that has come, which is quite powerful. It has overwhelmed the circumstance of the world. Then there is dengue. We hear about dengue fever in India, which is, like malaria. And then you have a different kind of mosquito bite in Africa, different kind of mosquito bite in America, even America. And you find that a small mosquito can practically put all our plans to, what I would call as complete ruin. Deadly, and especially in countries like Africa, it's more prevalent. I remember my spiritual master talking about how he became sick with a malaria bite. And for 30 days, the fever was so intense that he couldn't function. There was so much intensity in the fever. So a small mosquito bite can render us absolutely helpless. But we have difficulties with Trinadapi Sunichena. And it's a great wonder as to how this combination exists, that our consciousness is, has made us so overpowered, as so much so that we can't really function with intelligence, where we realize that we are quite helpless. In the grand scheme of things, we are very helpless. But here is Swayambo Manu, the king of the universe. His lifespan, is practically 71 yuga cycles. 71 yuga cycles. Incredible amount of time. He's constantly remembering the Lord because he's a servant of the Lord. So he's a Raja Rishi. The Lord is completely seated in his heart and he's giving him intelligence. He's giving him direction. But what is fascinating is that Kardama Muni, who is also very powerful, from a Brahmanical standpoint, Kardama Muni is very powerful. From a Kshatriya standpoint, Swayambo Manu is extraordinarily powerful. But both of them have this common bond of remembering the Lord at all times. So naturally, the desires of Swayambo Manu of wanting to marry off his daughter, Devahūti, is practically being arranged by the Lord himself, because that desire meets with a need for a suitable wife by Kardama Muni. Now, this whole situation is being managed by Lord Vishnu. This is an important lesson for the devotee community. What is important about this lesson? The most important lesson out of this particular chapter is the fact that regardless of what happens to us in an environment with devotees, if you're in part of a temple environment, as complex as temple environments can be, there are very complex temple environments around the world. I acknowledge that because it's a fact. There are so many difficult challenges which people face in different environments. We got to realize that in a temple environment, we are interacting and we are being subjected to certain experiences by devotees. So Krishna is in the heart in both cases. So we should never, ever, after coming into devotional service, ever look at our life in isolation without Krishna consciousness. Never, ever exclude the Krishna factor, because it will not make sense. In reality, it will not make sense. Because the situation is that we are connected to Krishna, someone else is connected to Krishna. So if there is an interaction which is very auspicious, then it's wonderful. If there is an interaction which practically gives us pain in the heart because we are interacting with a fellow devotee, that is also arrangement of Krishna. You should never, ever remove Krishna from the equation. And that is so even when you're dealing with the outside world. Essentially, what to say of dealing within the community of devotees. So we need to bring in Krishna and have an understanding. This is basically how it operates. This is being demonstrated here, that if there is a deep level, if there is a deep level of dependence, then Krishna is actually playing such an extraordinary role in bringing devotees together. His devotees are coming together. Very, very extraordinary role. Yeah. So Swayambo Manu wants to marry off his daughter. Kardama Muni basically wants to have a spouse who can support him in his service. And then both are seeking help because both are dependent on Krishna. And even though they're situated in different varnas, they all have a different way of depending. There's a commonality. And Swayambo, Manu, very powerful, but completely dependent. Transcendently situated. Not very often do you hear about a king who is transcendently situated. He is actually transcendently situated. The Raja Rishi term, which is used in the Bhagavad Gita, refers to such a king. Raja Rishi refers to such a king. Srila Prabhupada also mentions Janaka Maharaj, who is the father of Mother Sita. Raja Rishi refers to this particular statement where someone is exhibiting this extraordinary power externally as a regular person, but then internally there's extraordinary dependence on the Lord. So this particular circumstance is where externally his behavior is based on what he's supposed to do. Internally, his behavior is such that he's extraordinarily dependent. There's deep humility. He understands that all these arrangements are being made by the Lord. I have no desire but to serve you. I have no other desire but to be a part of your personal entourage. I want to serve you in any capacity. If not, I have no meaning to my life. This is going on in the heart. Externally, they're acting according to the principle of Varnashram. He's a king, so he's supposed to engage in certain kind of activity. He is in the Grahasthashram. He needs to marry off his daughter at an appropriate, what we would call as time. Yeah. So he has to make that arrangement. Now, externally, this is going on. But then internally, there's dependence. This internal dependence practically arranges for things externally. So this is what Krishna means, that I will carry what you lack and I'll preserve what you have. 9.22. This is exactly what it means. That I'll carry what you lack and then I'll preserve what you have. You see? Krishna means this. Krishna basically is going to make this arrangement. But then this depends on how much we are dependent on him. The extent to which we are dependent on Krishna is to the extent to which he will make arrangements. Then comes the principle of Trinadapi Sunichena, Tarori Vasaishna. Accepting the arrangement. You constantly have to have that mindset that there is an arrangement which is being made. I will accept it. This is Krishna's basic arrangement. It doesn't mean that we don't modify the arrangement of life. We don't make an attempt to make improvements. But all these attempts are all centered around the principle of wanting to do better in submitting ourselves and accepting the arrangement of the Lord. So there are multiple attempts that are being made to arrange life so that the Lord could intervene and make changes. Yeah. The best life is that which is arranged by Krishna. And desiring this is very important. How do you desire this? You basically desire this constantly from the perspective of wanting to engage in service. Once we come into this movement, then our life changes. And we should practically, constantly meditate on what the future is based on this particular arrangement. How can I basically act on Krishna in Krishna's service? What is it that is going to allow me back? When this meditation is on, then what happens is intelligence is provided. And then because intelligence is provided, then one acts on the intelligence and they move forward. And devotees basically bring devotees together. All arrangements are being made by devotees. It's basically a circumstance where Krishna is acting through different devotees. How does Krishna intervene? Krishna intervenes through devotees. Krishna intervenes through devotees. So we should have a tendency of wanting to depend on the Vaishnavas. Not everybody. When I'm qualifying this, I'm not making a derogatory comment in wanting to differentiate who is qualified and who is not. But we need to find someone who can inspire us in our devotional service. Then we know that such a person is going to be used by Krishna. There's already a connection because such a person is inspiring us. Then they have the ability to be used by Krishna to assist us because there's already a certain sense of dependence. They are inspiring us in Krishna consciousness. So not everybody, when I said not everybody, it was not a disqualification. It was more so to use our already known circumstances of who is inspiring, which means that such a person is practically being, carrying that particular role of inspiring us and pushing us forward, then in which case such a person becomes qualified to give us, advice. So then we depend because such a person is already connected to Krishna. Krishna is using them. Because Krishna attracts us through devotees. He is attracting us through Shiksha Gurus. He's attracting us through the Naam. Siksha Diksha Gurus. I'm using the word Shiksha Guru because Siksha Guru is how everybody starts, and then you find a Diksha Guru amongst the Shiksha Guru. So the point is, Krishna is already attracting us. He's already arranging for us. He's already reaching out. He's already nurturing us through people, through devotees. Then we need to ensure that we reach out and submit ourselves. And we spoke about this in the previous session. It may not be perfect if there are worldly matters, but because we have asked for help and because we are following the principle given in the Bhagavad Gita of wanting to depend on Vaishnavas, because we are following the principle of Srimad-Bhagavatam of depending on Vaishnavas, Krishna's intervention will be there. He will make things right, which is why simple devotees, the whole concept of simple devotees that we spoke of in the previous session, has a lot to do with their ability to be able to take help. Those who are advanced or they are in a position which is in the hierarchically higher position, they're actually quite lonely from the perspective that they may not have many people whom they can depend on because they need also this particular dependence. Being able to share their minds in confidence is a very important function for all devotees. So this is very important for us to realize that we are dependent on Sangha, we are dependent on the Vaishnavas around us, and we are dependent on them for us to be able to move forward. So depending on who is guiding us, we need to basically take their help in being able to move forward, because then Krishna is also intervening through them. This is intervention by Krishna. This is where the intelligence comes through. Unless we are in a position to directly communicate with them. Srila Prabhupada used to directly communicate with Krishna. Oftentimes when he goes to a temple, he would be very pleased after paying obeisances to the deities. He would turn around and he would have very appreciative glances towards the managers. Oftentimes it would also happen as he tours around the temple, that as he sees the deities, he would turn around and be very upset with the management team. And he would be very pointed in asking as to why the deities are upset. What is going on in the ashram? Why isn't there a certain kind of cooperation? There's so many different things can upset the deities in an environment. He would particularly be very upset, and he would ask. So this is basically an indication that the deities in different centers around the world, which Srila Prabhupada was visiting, they were communicating to him. They were actually sharing things which were happening so that he could take note and then he could make certain corrections. This movement during Prabhupada's time was actually managed by Krishna fully. And the extent to which there are devotees who are followers of Srila Prabhupada, the extent to which they are following Srila Prabhupada in a surrendered manner, to that extent Krishna is intervening for them as well. There is no doubt that even today, in our movement, after the departure of Srila Prabhupada, there are amazing personalities who are present in our movement, who have the ability to guide us, take us forward. There's no doubt. Srila Prabhupada gave us that gift. But the point I was wanting to make is that it was run by Krishna, and the movement is run and managed by Krishna to the extent to which those who participate, very specifically the leadership, have the ability to submit themselves to the will of Krishna. The more surrendered the leadership, the greater the intervention. And this is also demonstrated by Srila Prabhupada. Oftentimes he would travel around and then he would basically want to talk to managers. And then when very, very big managers used to come in, which were big temple projects, he would ignore them completely and he would talk to devotees who are, new devotees or someone who has particularly done something not very significant, but participated. This is a sign, I've mentioned this before. You can read about it in the Lilamrita. And Lilamrita is wonderful because you're practically seeing how Srila Prabhupada interacted with his servants. Satsarup Maharaj has done an amazing job in capturing all of this and then presenting it for us to read. It's a part of the Veda base if anybody wants to read. Now, it's very informative, all the letters, all the interactions. It's extraordinarily informative in terms of how he operated and how much direction Krishna had. So Krishna was practically managing the movement. The extent to which we are surrendered, Krishna will manage the movement even today. Whichever yatra is surrender, that would be management. There would be wonderful things that would happen. So is the case with individual consciousness. We spoke of collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is the responsibility of leadership in any yatra. Individual consciousness is our responsibility. What we do within the four walls of our home for us to be able to submit ourselves is individual responsibility. We have to take charge. the extent to which we are dependent on Krishna, to that extent he will intervene and he would make arrangements for us as well. This dependence is a process of sadhana bhakti. This dependence comes as one progresses and moves from the mixed mode of goodness, passion, ignorance to almost pure goodness. Almost pure goodness, then there's a dependence that would come in. There would be a dependence. There would be a greater yearning for service. There would be a greater demand of wanting to say that I have no business in this world if I can't serve you. You see, there would be a constant prayer of wanting to intensify and reach higher goals in Krishna consciousness. There would be great impatience, not in a what I would call as a defective way. Impatience of wanting to submit oneself more and wanting the intensity is required. Because without intensity, you cannot part the material covering. The material covering is very thick. Without intensity, one cannot really part the material covering. And that's why this prayer of a daily prayer, even of a personal kind before the spiritual master, of wanting to advance, wanting to be freed from the anarthas, is an absolute necessity so that we are constantly expressing ourselves. In the initial stages, such a prayer will be insincere because that's our nature. Most of us are insincere. At a given standpoint, we are all insincere at some point. Can we really wake up in the morning and then go before a mirror and say that all I desire is Krishna consciousness? We can't. You see, we really can't. So there is some level of insincerity of, there are so many different what we would call as Mishra Bhakti objectives. We are wanting this, wanting that along with Bhakti. Krishna acknowledges that. He takes a holistic picture. He doesn't deal with what we would call the occasional this desire, that desire. He really doesn't keep watching, saying what you are doing now, etc. He takes a big picture view of where the soul is heading, and he's practically assisting us. It's very easy for him to assist us in so many different ways. Now, the more we depend, the more we pray, and the more we develop intensity, the greater would be the result, even if it were to begin insincerely, because you wouldn't feel it from the heart that this is all I want to do. Krishna, why am I in the world? What am I trying to do here? I don't have any place in the world. I have no meaning to exist. I just want to serve you. This is the demand which can be made in the heart, which would start out insincerely. But if you practice it, then the insincerity would go away. When I say practice it, I'm saying make the prayer nevertheless. Even if you feel that we are not in the consciousness of being able to present it at the lotus feet of the Guru and Krishna in an appropriate consciousness, make the prayer anyways. There would be intervention. There would be results. There would then be anartha nivritti. And as anartha nivritti comes in, there would be a greater level of dependence. There would be a greater level of dependence because love has already come in. Surrender follows love. As a consequence, the intensity of surrender and love, then it would increase more and more. So there are different stages. There's nishta, there's ruchi, there's ashakti. Then one feels more loving emotions. Then the loving emotions condense and they become prema. So the point being that you need to start somewhere, even if it is defective, even if it is inappropriate, because you need to start somewhere. Every one of us needs to start, because without intensity, one cannot penetrate material nature. These are very intense individuals we come across in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Yeah. How intense do you need to be for you to offer prayers and then wait for the bride to come? How many would practically want to wait 10,000 years, offer prayers, and then wait for the bride to come so that they could engage in grihasthashram? Yeah. So he was wanting to get everything right. He was dependent. How many of us would probably think of, ensuring that we are able to receive instructions and then be patient and then be able to bring, the daughter to someone who is suitable? There's constant anxiety, etc. So the point which we're trying to make here is that these are very intense individuals, and this intensity is quite remarkable. And this is very necessary for us to penetrate material nature. Otherwise, material nature can bring about all kinds of complacency. Kardama Muni was already situated in goodness. he could have become extraordinarily complacent. He could have said that I've already achieved what I needed to achieve. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. His life was uncomplicated. He was already experiencing pure goodness. He was already experiencing all kinds of wonderful effects where he could practically have the Lord appear before him. And it's fascinating in Srimad-Bhagavatam, especially in the earlier yugas, the Lord appeared for various reasons. He appeared in the 10th canto purely for the pleasure of his devotees. Yeah. Paritranaya sadhunam. But then there's Paritranaya sadhunam, Vinashaya dushkritam. Then you find a Prajapati like Kardama Muni wanting to engage in the Grahastha ashram so that he could be efficient and not be affected by the ashram in itself, seeking help from the Lord, depending. And they were already situated. Swayambo Manu could possibly be called, how could he be intense? Because he could have been complacent. He had the whole universe under him, and for several million years he was ruling the universe. So how could he practically be developing that kind of intensity? So these are very extraordinary individuals that they did not allow the complacent circumstances to satisfy them. They were constantly wanting to improve upon their service and constantly wanting to upgrade their service on a day-to-day basis, which is what we ought to be doing. We ought to be examining where we were yesterday. If the chanting didn't go well yesterday because of time, the investment of time, the investment of when we chanted and how we chanted, and we did not interact and we did not serve, then today is a day for improvement. We immediately focus on the next day and we make an improvement. So we need to become intense, which is how these individuals were, which is quite extraordinary because they are so powerful. When you're so powerful, the sense of complacency could practically drown the person's effort. It's not easy. A sense of complacency could drown the person's effort. But here we are with circumstances that are so extraordinary that they practically wanted to take the Lord's guidance, even arranging the future of their life and the devotees' life. Because towards the end of the chapter, we find that Mother Devahūti was actually instructed by Sri Narad Muni to marry Kardama Muni. So she was taking the help of devotees, because when you take the help of devotees, Sri Narad Muni, of course, is extraordinary. He is practically involved in all extraordinary circumstances throughout Srimad-Bhagavatam to inspire us. But she was dependent on that. Okay, and then she goes and the parents go searching for this great sage. In this chapter, we're going to read about the interaction between Swayambo Manu and Kardama Muni, both dependent devotees who practically are experiencing connections between each other and arrangements which are practically being intervened by the Lord himself because of their extent of dependence and their extent of willingness to accept the Lord's arrangement. So this is basically our lesson from this. Our lesson is to particularly be able to accept the arrangements of the Lord on a daily basis. It may not make sense, but accept it first. If you accept it, then the intelligence for us to be able to manage the circumstances of the day, of the year, of the life itself, it would reveal itself. And it can reveal itself through a book. It can reveal itself through a certain class. It could reveal itself by interacting with those who inspire us. All of these are revelations where Krishna is going to intervene so that he could direct our life. So this is how dynamic spiritual life is. Spiritual life is not an experience which is static, where one can possibly say that everything remains well defined. It is not so. It's a very dynamic experience where there are changes that can happen on a daily basis if one wants those changes. One needs those changes, but one needs to really want that as well. Yeah, we do need it. We need intensity, but then we need to want that. We need to become a little desperate. And then the more sincere we become, there would be a certain point where we become sincere with the prayers, there would be reciprocation. We would receive intelligence, and then we would be able to move forward. It's an extraordinary cycle, because Krishna is in the heart, and the Guru is in the heart. The Guru Parampara is actively monitoring our progress through the Guru, the agency of the Guru and Sadhu. So there's so much opportunity here for interaction with helpers. There's so much help which has already been arranged so organically for us. But we are truly fortunate. Our effort is very minimal. It's actually extraordinarily well aligned with our limitations, very well aligned. Our effort is quite minimal. Yes, chanting 16 rounds is a very minimal effort for the outcome. If you were to look at the outcome, if you were to consider that you want to enter into pure devotional service, literally want to play with Krishna, then 16 rounds is very minimal effort. Submitting ourselves for service is very minimal effort. Reading Srimad-Bhagavatam daily is very minimal effort. This is basically what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave us. He said, the 5 principles, again, we want to remind ourselves, are we doing it to the fullest extent? Yeah. Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtan, Nama Smaran, Bhagavat Shravanam, then there's Sri Murti Seva, then wanting the desire to stay in the Dham. These are 5 principles. And executing these 5 principles is an easy task, relatively speaking. We are not compromising on anything. We don't do much in terms of austerity. There isn't an austerity. We are helped. We receive an extraordinary amount of help, unbelievable amount of help. There's cooperation at all levels, provided our inclinations and our desires are properly aligned. Yeah, all kinds of cooperation. So what we do find here extraordinary is that Srimad Bhagavatam has devoted a section of how life should be arranged practically, and one can still be very successful in Krishna consciousness. So our own business in Krishna consciousness in the modern day is very minimal, because there's so much mercy which is being reciprocated. There's so much reciprocation, there's so much mercy which has been provided, there's incredible amount of help that's been made available. And as a consequence, our effort is minimal. We really have no room to complain. Neither do we have, it will be extraordinarily, I would say, risky and negligent and foolish even for us to ignore this opportunity. Because in the bygone years, if you were to take up sadhana, if you were to do a sadhana, and then the reciprocation level, everything was very complex because there was a lot of opportunity for effort. But here we are, where we have minimum effort, tremendous amount of mercy that's being provided, and then we have an outcome which is unbelievable, which our even sages in those days couldn't aspire for. We have outcomes which are just incredible in Lord Chaitanya's movement. So we want to basically review our day-to-day activity. We need to review our plan, and then we want to ensure that we don't repeat what we did yesterday. We don't repeat what we did the previous week. We don't repeat what we did the previous year. We account for the pitfalls that we went through. We account for the less than, or what we would call as required effort. And we want to ensure that we put ourselves in a situation where there's massive improvement in the present year. Because why should we hope to achieve anything extraordinary this year if all we're going to do is what we did the previous year? Yeah? We don't want to be repeating what we did. We want to improve upon it. And it's easy to improve if you have 5 markers. Sadhu Sangha. Sadhu Sangha is also a matter of being able to hear. It's a matter of being able to hear. It's a matter of being able to associate and serve. There's so much opportunity. There's so much electronic media. It's incredible, the opportunity these days. I sometimes wonder that if Srila Prabhupada had the internet and he had the devices like the iPad and the iPhones or whatever phones, smartphones, no one can imagine what he would have accomplished in terms of the offering. I can't even imagine. Yeah. He managed his entire movement through letters. He traveled around, which was required because you physically go, you have the ability to inspire. He traveled around and he achieved so much with so little in terms of relative facilities. But imagine if Srila Prabhupada was present now. Yes, there's a certain degree of complexity. There are more distractions, but the opportunity for preaching, the opportunity for practically being able to, publish, he would have probably practically published everything. There's so much publishing software. It is just incredible as to what he would have done. I often wonder what Srila Prabhupada would have done. And then I also think that Srila Prabhupada can use one of us. He can use one of us to continue the idea of being able to propagate Krishna consciousness. He can use all of us for propagating Krishna consciousness in a very dynamic environment with all these facilities. No, because we are also submitting ourselves to Srila Prabhupada. There's really nothing that we can achieve without his mercy. So he can use us in so many different powerful ways for us to be able to achieve, wonderful strides. But we need to remember what he did with very minimal, facilities. We need to understand this. He had a frail, fragile body. He was 70 years old. That's when you call it a day. Even as devotees, that's when you call it a day. You are in Vrindavan, you won't feel like leaving. 70-year-old. Yeah. He goes through the trouble of traveling to the West, putting himself in the company of those whom the modern day, even Western devotees wouldn't want to associate. They wouldn't want to associate in the present condition. They were drug addicts. There are all kinds of troubles. And then here was a sadhu from Vrindavan who goes and he associates with them, stays with them, trains them, and then he manifests this extraordinary movement, opens centers around the world for facilities. And then he practically writes during the nights, sleeps very little, with a body which is aging. It's also aging because of taking on many disciples. The karma is being displaced. And here we are today because of his mercy. So it's actually good to reflect on what he did with very little. This was because he was dependent on Krishna. And he was extraordinarily humble. Because he had compassion and he was extraordinarily humble. He wanted to save everybody. This is compassion. But he was very humble to realize that he couldn't do it on his own. So when you have this combination of being extraordinarily compassionate, where you want to accomplish amazing things, but you also have the humility to recognize the inability that we have as an individual, then there's an immediate reciprocation where Krishna makes all the arrangements. Krishna arranges for everything because now the individual has the ability to allow Krishna to use them. So this is being seen in this chapter as well. These are individuals who are stepping aside and allowing Lord Vishnu to make all the arrangements for them. They have the ability to step aside. It's a very extraordinary ability to be able to step aside and allow the Lord to come in. This is our business. The more and more and more we realize that we don't have the ability to manage, we don't have the ability to achieve things. This requires humility. And the more and more and more we become dependent, and then we also want to serve him. This combination is very important. To serve means to become compassionate, to save others. Then Krishna would intervene. He would give the power that's necessary. This is basically an arrangement of someone who wants to serve, who becomes compassionate enough because he wants to accomplish great things for being able to save others. He wants to share the gift that he has received. And then Krishna is reciprocating. So that is what we saw with Srila Prabhupada. Here we are seeing again the same principle in Srimad-Bhagavatam of devotees with great power, but with the humility to be able to depend on Lord Vishnu. And all arrangements are being made. The smallest detail is being taken care of. And this is just a wonderful arrangement. What is the other lesson that we can gain from this particular chapter? That if something happens naturally, something happens easily, which is also conducive to Krishna consciousness, it is Krishna's arrangement. If something happens after extraordinary effort, and we basically break our back in achieving this particular objective, where it is a part of our life, but then it is not directly related to Krishna consciousness, then we should realize that we are working towards a desire. Yeah. So here they're talking about opportunity for sense gratification. If it were to come on its own accord, it is okay to accept it. When I use the word sense gratification, I'm talking about that which is not related directly to serving the Lord, but which is a part of what we have to engage in. So there might be a certain facility that is given to a devotee. There's a certain facility which is being given in terms of accommodations, resources, etc. And this needs to be accepted. So if it comes on its own accord, and all you've been asking for is wanting to serve the Lord, then you accept it. Srila Prabhupada displayed Yukta Vairagya. Someone took him in a Rolls Royce. He was okay taking a ride in a Rolls Royce. It happened with, I think, the Beatles and a few other people. Even in different places around the world, the devotees used to arrange a convoy, or I would say an entourage with different big cars and so on. Srila Prabhupada used to accept it. Some of his disciples who were actually creating facility in somewhat very difficult terrain, which where no facilities were available, it was just a hut. Srila Prabhupada accepted it, but because it was love. His disciples wanted to offer him something with love. He would accept it, whether it was a Rolls Royce or whether it was a hut, he accepted it. So this was seen. So when arrangements come easily, understand that Krishna is involved, especially if you're only asking for service, then it is okay to accept those. If all you're doing is you're asking for service, it's okay to accept those, after some little deliberation. But if you're really struggling and you're trying to achieve something, then oftentimes it may not be what Krishna wants. That's why there's such a big struggle. It's a big struggle that occurs. So this is very important as a lesson as well. So here, two people are wanting something. There's an immediate reciprocation. It happens easily. This means Krishna is wanting to give. It's an easy way to know. Similarly, after we go through a lot of hardship in life, if we become more and more and more serious with Krishna consciousness, then understand that Krishna is intervening. He's practically giving us a certain flavor of life for us to be able to put everything on the table and to reprioritize life. He is practically telling us that your life had so many different priorities. Now you have pain here, you have pain there, you have pain in a few other places. It is time for you to put all your daily activity on the table, reprioritize, push things away that have no sense, that make no sense, and become steadfast in objectives which make sense. So when there's difficulty, but we make advancement in Krishna consciousness, where there's a deeper level of connection with Nam, there's a deeper level of connection with what you would call as the reading of Srimad-Bhagavatam, hearing Srimad-Bhagavatam. There's a deeper level of connection with devotees and service, etc., and opportunity for service. That is Krishna's arrangement. This is how we recognize whether it is our karma or whether Krishna is making arrangements. If Krishna is making arrangements, it has to be good for Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness would thrive if Krishna is making arrangements. If we are just experiencing a lot of suffering, it disillusions us, it removes us from Krishna consciousness, where we hang the bead bag on the wall and say that I've been chanting, I've been coming for your service, I've been doing so many wonderful things for the past so many years. But here you are, Krishna, you're not reciprocating by even giving me this little facility that I asked you for. This is our karma. So we should learn to distinguish the two. If there is a negative experience which pushes us towards Krishna consciousness, understand that it is Krishna's arrangement. If there's a negative arrangement which is happening to us, which practically removes us from Krishna consciousness, understand that we're just experiencing our karma. Regardless, the best way to operate is to train the mind to constantly accept every day as Krishna's arrangement. If we don't do that, we are at risk, because every day there would be challenges. We need to train ourselves to accept that today you have arranged everything for me. And then that would allow us the perspective for us to be able to accept life. It would also allow us the ability to receive intelligence from within, from Krishna, or from whoever is connected to him, through classes, through reading. So this is an extraordinarily important principle, to be able to accept things as they are every day. This is Trinadapi Sunichena. This is basic independence. Okay, I'm dependent on you and you arrange this. All right, Krishna, please give me intelligence so that I may be able to understand. I can't understand this arrangement. Please give me intelligence. Does it mean that we don't act? No. Krishna consciousness is dynamic. We need to act. We need to act in the environment. We need to understand that this is basically the arrangement that's been made. What is it that I can do? Not so much to endeavor to make massive improvement, but then more so, what is it that I can do to make improvements so that it can facilitate Krishna consciousness more powerfully? This is basically a requirement as well, that we need to act, but we also need to depend. It's a tightrope walk. It's a very, very balanced tightrope walk. It's not easy to do. It requires skills, it requires guidance, it requires help, but we need to take this up. We need to, on a daily basis, find out what we should do to improve upon things. But at the same time, we should have the ability to accept whatever is happening around us as Krishna's arrangement. So the endeavor for improving material life has to come through the process of what is going to facilitate sadhana. This should be the goal. So how many years am I going to work? What is the kind of money that I need? How could I implement a future retirement plan? When should I retire? Where should I retire? This should be based on Krishna consciousness. If it is based on Krishna consciousness, resources will come. Resources will be made available because intelligence will be made available, and we would have the ability to use our intelligence for us to be able to move forward. If it is not, if we don't have a plan, then we are submitting ourselves to the machinations and the daily manipulation of the mind. The mind is always shopping. It's always shopping because it's in touch with passion. It gets stimulated by media. It gets stimulated by peers. And we are constantly going to be at the mercy of the mind in terms of arranging our future. So it's easier to sit and reflect and figure out what your future ought to be. It's easier to say that this is what I'm going to need for me to be able to chant in peace. This is an important requirement. Yeah, it's an important requirement because our sadhana is long haul. We do sadhana for 40 years. I'm giving an average, of a devotee, 40, 50 years. So you can't be unstable for 40, 50 years and then manage to consolidate years and years of good sadhana. There's a necessity to constantly desire an outcome where we can contribute more towards Krishna consciousness and less towards maintenance. When the desire comes in, then there would be intelligence in terms of where to go, what is required. There would also be resources that would come our way, and it will be very easy. The easy part is because we are making arrangements organically. Yeah. I would suggest that whoever is in the call, devotees, and whoever is going to listen afterwards, you should read this chapter. I'm just going to do as much as I can for 10 minutes, and I'll open up for questions. I've given a gist, so perhaps what would help is for you to read, and if I do find that there's something significant here, which I need to share, I will give you that particular statement as well. The first verse, this is chapter 22, the marriage of Kardama Muni and Devahūti. Sri Maitreya said, after describing the greatness of the emperor's manifold qualities and activities, the sage became silent, and the emperor, feeling modesty, addressed him as follows. Manu replied, to expand himself in Vedic knowledge, Lord Brahma, the personified Veda, from his face created you, the Brahmanas, who are full of austerity, knowledge, and mystic power, and are averse to sense gratification. Austerity, knowledge, and mystic power, these are Brahmanical qualities. Aversion to sense gratification is also a Brahmanical quality because they are in a mode of goodness. There has to be an aversion. Mode of passion is when there's an eagerness for sense gratification. And Manu basically is talking about Lord Brahma as the personified Veda. So the word Vidhi, Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, comes from Vidhi, which is rules and regulations. Vidhi is the name of Lord Brahma because he's the personified Vedas, in the sense that he is executing the purport and the essence of the Vedas. He's serving the Lord. For the protection of the Brahmanas, the 1,000-legged Supreme Being created us, the Kshatriyas, from his 1,000 arms. Hence the Brahmanas are said to be his heart and the Kshatriyas his arms. So for the Supreme Lord, the universal form, the 1,000-legged Supreme Being is the universal form. And here, Sri Manu is basically talking about the Kshatriyas being the arms to protect, while the Brahmanas are the heart itself of the Lord. That is why the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas protect each other as well as themselves, and the Lord himself, who is both the cause and effect and is yet immutable, protects them through each other. What is significant is that we will read further in Srimad-Bhagavatam. The Brahmanas of the bygone ages, Brahmana by Guna and Karma. Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. not by birth. One can be born in such a family and could also have the guna and the karma, then they would definitely be qualified as that. But it is guna karma vibhagashaha. Now, the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas protect each other. Those days, the Brahmanas were so powerful that the Kshatriyas were dependent on the Brahmanas. We read further in Srimad-Bhagavatam about how Vena, King Vena, he was so powerful, but he was cruel by nature. So someone with great power who is cruel is not a dependable person, because he has great power and he's cruel. So he can cause a lot of harm to those who are dependent on him. So the sages and the Brahmanas in that particular kingdom got together and they practically killed him. The Brahmanas got together and they displaced the king. They removed the king because he was unqualified. He was actually giving trouble to everybody else. It is quite extraordinary in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. The punishment which is being meted out for mode of ignorance is so severe. There is no compromise. There is no such thing as, we shouldn't, what I would call as act out in violence. Punishment to mode of ignorance, to correct mode of ignorance, because you cannot correct mode of ignorance without punishment. The mode of ignorance recognizes a beating, which is what you notice throughout Srimad-Bhagavatam. Parikshit Maharaj is being confronted by the personality of Kali, he removes his sword. Yeah. Lord Ram chastises. Krishna chastises. You find that the mode of ignorance is being dealt with chastisement, which is physical chastisement. So the Brahmanas physically chastised Vena and displaced him, they removed him from his kingship. The Brahmanas were so powerful that the Kshatriyas depended on them. It's quite extraordinary. And then the Brahmanas were not dependent on the Kshatriyas. They were not. The Brahmanas had so much subtle wealth because of their engagement in austerity. They had so much power that when they went before a king and they asked for alms, and they were actually wanting some house, or they were wanting some cow, or they were wanting some facility, they were actually first giving the king the facility through blessings. When the Brahmana is blessing, then he's passing on some of his acquired subtle wealth. So there's, we say that we're being blessed. The Brahmana is blessing, he's passing on his subtle wealth. And the king is giving physical wealth to the Brahmana. So the Brahmana is not dependent on the king. The king is practically only returning what we would call as a physical form of what's been received at a subtle level. So the Brahmana is blessing, and he's giving the subtle wealth. He's blessing, we call, basically being blessed just to receive all those credits. The Brahmana has earned those credits. And if he were to put his hands on someone, he can give those credits. And the person who is receiving it has the ability to reciprocate physically. This is the arrangement. So the Brahmana is not dependent. The Brahmana was never dependent. This is a fundamental precept or fundamental qualification of the Brahmana. This has to be understood, that the Brahmana's blessing, or someone who is in the mode of goodness, their blessing is practically the blessing that is required for the other classes of men to create resources. So you receive resources in a subtle form from the Brahmana. They can conduct a yajna, they can conduct a puja, they can give instructions. They can do things which we cannot do because they are in touch with the Lord in different ways, because they basically have what we would call the quality of goodness which is predominating them. And they live simply and they live in austerity because goodness thrives in austerity. We spoke about it in the previous session as well. So they have the ability to bless the king. So the Brahmana is not dependent on the king. The king is dependent on the Brahmana. And the Brahmana protects the king through knowledge, and there's a reciprocal arrangement. So this is what is being spoken of here. That is why the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas protect each other as well as themselves. And the Lord himself, who is both the cause and effect and is yet immutable, protects them through each other. So Krishna uses the Kshatriyas to ensure the Brahmanas have a peaceful surrounding. Yeah? Then the Brahmanas bless the king so that there can be reciprocation. Now I have resolved all my doubts simply by meeting you, for your lordship has very kindly and clearly explained the duty of a king who desires to protect his subjects. It's my good fortune that I've been able to see you, for you cannot easily be seen by persons who have not subdued the mind or controlled the senses. I'm all the more fortunate to have touched with my head the blessed dust of your feet. In one sense, because he's giving his daughter, he is the father-in-law. So he is superior from the position of relationships. But by Varna and by qualification, Kardama Muni is superior. So Manu, even though he is the oldest being, he is the start, he is in the Kshatriya class, he's paying obeisances to Shri Kardama Muni, even though he has come specifically to offer his daughter, which is quite extraordinary, where every little step, they're following rules and regulations, which is very, very powerful. I have fortunately been instructed by you, and thus great favor has been bestowed upon me. I thank God that I've listened with open ears to your pure words. O great sage, graciously be pleased to listen to the prayer of my humble self, for my mind is troubled by affection for my daughter. My daughter is the sister of Priyavrata and Uttanapad. She is seeking a suitable husband in terms of age, character, and good qualities. The moment she heard from sage Narada of your noble character, learning, beautiful appearance, youth, and other virtues, she fixed her mind upon you. So it appears that even she was attracted to the mode of goodness. She was not so much attracted to the Kshatriya quality of just someone's appearance, because in this verse, she heard from Sri Narada of your noble character, learning, beautiful appearance, youth, and other virtues. So she was actually interested in having a spouse and who is extraordinarily learned. So she was interested in actually being the wife of a Brahmana. Therefore, please accept her, O chief of the Brahmanas, for I offer her with faith, and she is in every respect fit to be a wife and take charge of your household duties. Extraordinary. To deny an offering, this is a very important verse, to deny an offering that has come of itself is not commendable, even for one absolutely free of all attachment, much less one addicted to sensual pleasure. One who rejects an offering that comes of its own accord, but later begs a boon from a miser, thus loses his widespread reputation, and his pride is humbled by the neglectful behavior of others. Basically, he is telling Sri Kardama Muni that the Lord has arranged this, and when you accept the arrangement of the Lord, then there's great good fortune. Instead, if you develop your own conception of what the future should be, then you're going to be insulted, you're going to be put down upon, because then you would have to go and beg from someone who is not ready to give. Here, I'm ready to give. And the Lord has arranged this because it has come so nicely. He's bringing Devahūti, and then he's practically giving him in marriage. Swayambo Manu continued, O wise man, I heard that you are prepared to marry. Please accept a hand which is being offered to you by me, since you have not taken a vow of perpetual celibacy. The great sage replied, certainly I have a desire to marry, and your daughter has not yet married or given a word to anyone. Therefore, our marriage according to the Vedic system can take place. Let your daughter's desire for marriage, which is recognized in the Vedic scriptures, be fulfilled. Who would not accept her hand? She is so beautiful that by her bodily luster alone, she excels the beauty of her ornaments. Not inappropriate at all, quite amazingly, where this description of Mother Devahūti's beauty is being spoken of by Kardama Muni to Swayambo Manu. So the Srimad-Bhagavatam practically shows the culture where, even though a topic which would generally be considered sensitive is being discussed, there is no what I would call as a sense of contamination. You read it and you become purified. So let your daughter's desire for marriage. He is practically talking about marriage and about the good qualities of Devahūti in terms of her appearance. And that is not considered out of place. It's just quite fascinating how Srimad-Bhagavatam, because of the transcendental nature of the scripture, it practically has the ability to keep us at a level which is completely transcendental, even if topics apparently, because this Srimad-Bhagavatam is Krishna personified, so we can only use the word apparently, because on an absolute platform, all of this is completely transcendental. But then from an apparent consideration, here we are talking about the beauty of a girl, here we are talking about the prospective bridegroom praising the beauty of the girl who is standing in front of him to the father. So all of this seems to be a little bit odd, but then reality, this is all on the absolute platform. I have heard that Vishwa Vasu, the great Gandharva, his mind, stupefied with infatuation, fell from his airplane after seeing your daughter playing with a ball on the roof of the palace. For she was indeed beautiful, with her tinkling ankle bells and her eyes moving to and fro. Very descriptive. It appears that whoever saw her also spread the word, and it has reached the ears of Sri Kardama Muni. What wise man would not welcome her, the very ornament of womanhood, the beloved daughter of Swayambo Manu, and the sister of Uttanapada? Those who have not worshipped the gracious feet of the goddess of fortune cannot even perceive her, yet she has come of her own accord to seek my hand. So this is basically the blessing of Mother Lakshmi, because he was worshipping Vishnu. Bhadra, when we use the word Bhadra, it is Mother Lakshmi. She's practically blessing those whoever are worshipping her Lord. Yeah. So whenever we offer prayers to Lord Narayana, then we are receiving the blessings of Mother Lakshmi. Whenever we offer prayers to Mother Lakshmi, we'll receive the blessings of Lord Narayana. So it is practically a reciprocal arrangement where he likes to hear her praise and she likes to hear his praise. So it's almost an arrangement which is being made here, where he's making a statement that she has blessed you. There must be a blessing of Mother Lakshmi for this kind of good fortune to come to the home. Therefore, I shall accept this chaste girl as my wife on the condition that after she bears semen from my body, I shall accept the life of devotional service accepted by the most perfect human beings. That process was described by Lord Vishnu. It's free from envy. So he's already putting up a condition saying, yes, after she is impregnated, then I will leave, I will take sannyas. So quite an extraordinary bridegroom for quite an extraordinary girl and father-in-law. The highest authority for me is the unlimited Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom this wonderful creation emanates and in whom its sustenance and dissolution rest. He is the origin of all Prajapatis, the personalities meant to produce living entities in this world. Sri Maitreya said, O great warrior Vidura, the sage Kardama said, this much only, and then became silent, thinking of his worshipable Lord Vishnu, who has a lotus on his navel. As he silently smiled, his face captured the mind of Devahūti, who began to meditate upon the great sage. After having unmistakably known the decision of the queen, as well as that of Devahūti, the emperor most gladly gave his daughter to the sage, whose host of virtues was equaled by hers. Empress Shatarupa lovingly gave most valuable presents suitable for the occasion, such as jewelry, clothes, and household articles and dowry to the bride and bridegroom. Thus relieved of his responsibility by handing over his daughter to a suitable man, Swayambo Manu, his mind agitated by feelings of separation, embraced his affectionate daughter with both his arms. The emperor was unable to bear the separation of his daughter. Therefore, tears poured from his eyes again and again, drenching his daughter's head as he cried, my dear mother, my dear daughter. After asking and obtaining the great sage's permission to leave, the monarch mounted his chariot with his wife and started for his capital, followed by his retinue. Along the way, he saw the prosperity of the tranquil seers, beautiful hermitages on both the charming banks of the Saraswati, the river so agreeable to saintly persons. I will stop here. You can read the rest, but in the following week, if I do find that I want to share anything from these verses, I will definitely bring it forth, and then we will have a little discussion. But please do read it, as it would help. Okay, I think I have a question on chat, and let me just take that question. One moment. In alignment with the topic of Brahmana's ability to bless spoken of today, there are situations in communities sometimes fearing the curses of Brahmanas also. For example, if the resources they request for performing certain rituals and ceremonies are questioned or thought to be disproportionate, somewhat out of fear of being cursed would just go ahead. Some out of fear of being cursed would just go ahead without being able to object. If all the subtle wealth comes from Krishna, would Krishna permit for such a spiritual power and potency to be misused in the name of the rituals, or is it just an unexamined superstition that runs through time? In reality, no Brahmana worth his salt would make a demand of wealth. No one. So those are not real situations from the perspective of what is contained, because they are capable of intense austerity. They're capable of intense austerity. Because they are capable of austerity and they are situated in goodness, the ideal Brahmana is one who has the ability to live a simple life which is uncomplicated. It is when the individual goes into the mode of passion, is that when they have variegated desires. And then they would present those variegated desires to someone. You can experience that even here in Vrindavan. You go to some temples, and if you do not give dakshina, they will curse you, literally curse you. Yeah, you would not even feel like going into the temple because you don't want to interact with the priest. You don't want to interact with the priestly class here. You will find as if, it's a great, I would say, discouragement from the perspective. Yeah, they will literally curse you. They would use words which you will hear on the street. Yeah, and these are people who basically are born in the Brahminical race. And so the point being that we always need to remember that we need to take into account the fact that if someone has such language and also has the desire to curse, etc., then they are not on the Brahminical platform. In some cases, we notice, for example, with sage Durvasa, he would not make demands, but he would have zero tolerance. That is because he carries the potency of Lord Shiva, of Rudra. And as a consequence, that potency, he can't really manage that potency at times, and it comes out where he curses because he finds that there is a slight, what I would call as tinge of false ego. So you will find that in the further sections of Srimad-Bhagavatam, where Sri Durvasa Muni cursed Ambarish Maharaj, and then the Lord intervened. You will find it in other places as well. So the point we want to make here is that it is not ideal. And the curses of such people would not be effective, especially if they're not properly Brahmanical. Really potent Brahmanas, if they curse, the curse is irrefutable. It is not solvable. It can be carried from one lifetime to another, one lifetime to another. It can be carried, which is also being spoken of here in Srimad-Bhagavatam. The emphasis in Srimad-Bhagavatam is on Gunaan. So the quality of a Brahmana is what Srimad-Bhagavatam is emphasizing. It is not emphasizing birth. In the modern day, the confusion is in these two things, someone being born versus someone having the Guna. People being born and also having the Guna, it's wonderful. But there can be births where this Guna is not there. The profession is not being done. And there are all kinds of rampant desires, etc. So we need to understand where we are coming from. We don't need to kind of think that this possibility exists. There are people who become afraid of such statements, but in reality, there isn't. It doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold water. So that's the point I was wanting to make. One needs to have the true qualities of the mode of goodness. And if they have the true qualities of mode of goodness, then they have the ability for austerity, which means they don't have desires. Yeah. When they do need something, they need it because of wanting to perform a certain yajna which will benefit everybody. They might go and ask for a cow because they would need ghee, they would need milk for the yajna to be done nicely. But it is not out of their own personal desires. So we need to kind of distinguish this behavior with that nature. It is not the title, it's more the quality that's important. And if the quality is there, this problem would never arise. If just the title is there, the quality is missing, these problems will arise. Here's how we distinguish this. It is not a superstition from the perspective. It is true, but you need both. You need the quality first. The Brahmanical quality has to be there. If the Brahmanical quality is there and there's misbehavior with such a person, then the consequences are terrible. If the Brahmanical quality is there and the proper behavior is there with the person, they have the ability to fix things for us. There's no doubt. That's quite rare in the modern day because not everybody practices things as they're supposed to. Any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
A lot of thoughts. It's so wonderful. I have two questions, Prabhu. Um, you did mention Lord knows where the soul is going, and He facilitates. So our prayer, mm, although Lord knows that where our soul is going, our prayer, my understanding is our prayer can change it. He can.
Um,
Is that
can
right?
you repeat, Mataji? Can you hold the mic a little bit closer, please? Because
Okay.
it's.
Can you hear me now,
Thank
Prabhu?
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Lord knows where the soul is going, you did mention, because He facilitate. And then our prayer can change that because towards Him. Because when we came here, anyway, Lord knows that we are coming here. This would happen to us. Everything only we don't know. So, but in this life, what we are doing is also He knows. But then, if we desire to be moved towards Him, so that at the beginning, what was our plan? Not our plan, what is happening to our soul can be changed. Is that right, Prabhu?
Absolutely. So there are two things. We spoke about it in the previous session as well.
Yeah.
There is karma
Hmm.
and there is desire.
Yeah.
If the karma is to be born in a certain kind of body,
Hmm.
karma could bring us into a certain kind of religion, which may not offer much information about the Lord. But then there's a deep desire to
Hmm.
know more. Then the Lord facilitates our coming in touch with His servants who
Hmm.
can provide us with a greater level of information. So if karma and destiny are completely dynamic, they can change.
Hmm.
I can just give you an example. And this is an example which is quite powerful from the perspective of Gau Seva,
Yeah.
the offering of cows in the service of the divine couple. A few months back, a year back around, I was offering some jaggery, good
Hmm.
molasses
Yeah.
to cows here in Vrindavan. And there was this pandit who was standing next to me and he was observing how the cow was licking up all the good and the sugar from my hand, my palm.
Hmm.
And he made a very nice remark. He said, as she is licking your palm, your destiny will change. Yeah. So, yeah.
Oh.
So, just an example
Hmm.
that even coming in touch with Krishna's cows and then serving them in certain ways, serving in the kirtan, standing in the kirtan, we dance for Krishna, we engage in service. All of this is so dynamic that it will practically change where we are heading. So even though we've come with karma,
Hmm.
the karma that we've come with is absolutely dynamic to the point where, especially when we come in touch with a very powerful process like Krishna consciousness,
Hmm.
everything can change. Everything can change. So
Yeah.
that's exactly the point.
So another thing, Prabhu, since you spoke about the cows, of late, I'm so much inclined to do Go Seva. And I don't know what it is, why, I really don't know, but I do really wanted to do, I really wanted to get connected and also even also with Govardhan. I don't know, of late, some different thoughts are coming. I
It's
don't
nice.
but I don't know, like, so that means I should move towards them, yeah? It's not,
Yeah,
I
well, basically,
find
you
it
know,
so,
you live in, if I'm, you live in London, right?
now I moved to Scotland, Prabhu.
Oh, Scotland. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Scotland.
No, I just
Yeah.
moved actually 2 months ago.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I've been to Scotland. I was in
Karuna, what?
Edinburgh. Yeah, just for 2 days. Anyways, the point is,
Yeah.
um, find a farm, a Krishna farm, and just volunteer your time. Just volunteer your time. This is just wonderful to just go there and then go to the Kaushala, volunteer your time so that they can use you.
Being honest, that is why I moved also.
Oh, very good, perfect,
Okay.
perfect. You're breathing good air. That's the claim
Oh,
of Scotland.
air and water is amazing here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's another thing, Prabhu. You did speak about the leader's consciousness collective in a yatra. Sometimes there are, but I just want to understand, Prabhu. Sometimes in yatras, even though they are, you can hear me, Prabhu? Well.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sometimes, yeah, you can see yatras are struggling, but they don't make much effort to change. And is it because they are comfortable with that struggling, or they don't want to take a risk for Krishna, or they think what they're doing is right? What is it, Prabhu? Why sometimes, like we say, we have to always strive to move towards Krishna, to do perfect things for Krishna. So we should thrive. So
I want to ask you this. When you say yatras are struggling, what do you mean by that? What is the struggle that you're trying to talk about?
okay, this is about it's only very few devotees, maybe very few devotees, not many. So whoever there also, sometimes they may not join, they may not come much for service. That whoever is there will be just struggling and struggling and struggling. And so why is that? It's happening for many, many years, but it's
Yes.
no improvement. Why
Yeah.
is that, Prabhu?
There has to be intensity, and there has to be preaching done. It is all about being able to preach in certain areas, to be able to increase the intensity. The way it has to be done is the service has to be increased. And as service increases, then there would be greater resources being made available. So the point being that if you have a one-room temple and you think you have three devotees, and then you really want to just keep your service to the level of three devotees,
Hmm.
then it's a problem.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you have a one-room temple with three devotees, but then you're making a plan for 30 devotees for the next year to have Rath Yatra, to have a Janmashtami celebration. Then Krishna will send 30 devotees. Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's a matter of how we want to serve and how we want to expand.
Hmm.
And that basically requires the mindset of wanting to expand the movement,
Hmm.
not so much wanting to practice our Krishna consciousness alone, rather practice our Krishna consciousness in isolation with facilities we have,
Hmm.
more so wanting to constantly give and provide for whilst increasing our Krishna consciousness.
It's kind of a
The natural outcome of good chanting would be a desire to spread Krishna consciousness. It's a very natural outcome. On the contrary, if our chanting and our sadhana is not so very good, then what does happen is that we kind of struggle with even what's being given to us. This goes back to my statement. As an individual, you need to wake up and understand that Krishna has given you exactly what is needed for you to move forward.
Yeah.
But even as a yatra, Krishna has given you exactly what you need to move forward, which means any given time, any yatra in the world has already received what it requires to go to the next stage. But they need to go to the next stage by thinking that, yes, I want to move to the next stage. How could I use the resources that I've been given? This is what you have given me. How could I use this to maximize results? This is the responsibility of leadership. It is required. Then there will be movement. There will be forward movement. So two things. One, there has to be sadhana to develop deep desires to serve in an extraordinary way. Two, there has to be what we would call the ability to use what's already been given efficiently so that one could move forward.
Yeah. To the best of our ability, we should use what we have. Is that what you're
You
saying?
know, years back, 30 years back, I remember being a part of a sangha. And I remember being a part of the sangha at a very early stage where there were two rows of devotees. And we used to sit, sorry, there's a mosquito. There were two rows of devotees, and we used to just sit on adjoining couches, and then we used to read the Back to Godhead. This used to be Sangha. And then it slowly, steadily expanded where there was a lot of effort. The effort was put in by the devotees who were running the Sangha. They used to facilitate young people to come and stay over on certain nights so that they could wake up for Mangalarti. There was a lot of emphasis on chanting. There was a lot of emphasis on wanting to do what is right in terms of reading Sangha, etc. From those two couches, it moved to 30, then 30 moved, then the person who was owning that particular flat, he required more space. Automatically, the organization that he worked for provided him with a nice mansion. So we all moved to that. And then once we went there, that place started filling up. He got a bigger place. Yeah, Krishna gave him a bigger place. It all happened naturally. I've seen it happen. And then it reached a point from 2 devotees or 3 devotees or 10 devotees sitting across couches. They started hiring a hall because they started having Sangha for 3,000 devotees every week. Yeah. So there has to be focus on 2 things. 1, serious sadhana for everybody. 2, there also has to be a deep desire that would come after serious sadhana to use what's being given efficiently. So it's a combination.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I just take some questions online. On the points, not to repeat same thing, day, week, and year, we should be able to maintain and be consistent with what we have been doing now. Can you please advise more on this point? So the idea is wanting to basically be consistent. Yes, consistency is absolutely required, but consistency and consolidation should also be combined with desire to make improvements constantly. So Krishna consciousness, I've said this so many times, it's like scaling a mountain. When you're scaling a mountain and you're scaling a peak, you will reach plateaus. But to think that the plateau itself is the goal would be a mistake. You need to constantly be wanting to climb and as you climb, you need more effort than what it took the previous year because you're climbing a peak. It becomes steeper, steeper, steeper. As you keep climbing the heights, then you need more effort as you keep going higher and higher and higher. So that persistent effort has to combine with the consolidation of what has already been achieved. So too much fluctuation is not good. But then the point is you need to consolidate very carefully. So sometimes I advise devotees, don't jump from 4 rounds to 16 rounds. Go from 4 to 6 and be sure to never reduce 4. Go from 4 to 8. Be sure never to reduce 8. Then from 8 to 12, then you reach 8 to 16 to whatever, amount of rounds. Never go back, but don't increase unless you're able or developing a desire to increase. So don't increase. This consolidation has to be there. Yeah. We need to increase when we are confident that we are able to give more and we basically feel an eagerness to chant. So this is basically how we could step by step reach the point of 16 rounds and then be able to remain consistent, but again, be impatient with results, not so much in a negative way, but more so in wanting to see what else could be done on a daily basis so that we could make improvements. So that's how the plan should be. Okay. Now let's just see the next question. As I'm reading Srila Prabhupada's books, I'm realizing how much I am completely engaged only in sense gratification all through these years, except for extremely minimal devotional service. I feel the need to engage more and more and completely in Krishna's service, as this is the only goal and solace. Yeah, this is basically how it should be. If you're very sincere, then we will have the ability to see that what is being asked of us and what's being given to us versus what we are doing is minimal. It may be more in a relative sense compared to others, but our own reflection of who we are and what we do should always be such that we want to make improvements. And the fact that, we really haven't done much. So this is powerful, yes. So yeah, we should continue that particular mood. Is there anything else, any other question that I could address before we close for the day, for the evening? All right. So thank you very much. Let me just close. Okay. Oh, there's a question here. When you say die before dying, does it mean that we should give up desires that take us away from Krishna? Die before dying is to basically minimize or practically experience the minimization of body consciousness. What happens at death is where we give up our identity of connection to this body. So die before dying essentially means reaching the platform of being able to understand that we are not this body to such an extent that it's practically seen. So all arrangements are being thought of from the perspective of Krishna consciousness. Yeah. So we live for Krishna consciousness. And then as we become more and more and more situated in wanting to exist for Krishna consciousness, then we are dying as the body would be, because the body's needs are being, I would say, not disregarded, but the body's needs are not prioritized as the priority that drives life, which is the case with most people in the world, almost everybody. So this is dying before dying, die before dying. Dying before dying practically means that we experience what one would experience if this body were to die, which is to not prioritize based on something which is dead. We would want to prioritize on eternity. We want to prioritize on knowledge. We want to prioritize on the nature of the soul. So that priority comes, then you are dying before dying. There's a death before dying, dying. So as we die, we become more alive, because the soul becomes more alive as the body is minimized, or rather the body's needs are minimized. This is not the idea of performing austerity. It is more a matter of realizing that this is the right thing to do. It is realizing that life should be led internal life, inside out. We don't want to live outside in, where the stimulation of the environment is practically creating a circumstance for the soul which is less efficient. We want to live inside out, where the soul's needs are being prioritized, and we are externally managing life to facilitate the journey of the soul. So that's what it means. Then the question is, living in India much better? Is living in India much better for sadhana than in the US? I would not really be particular about where we are. The Dham is definitely powerful, but I would not be very specific about India. India is as bad or even worse. The work environment in India is extraordinarily intense. People struggle like anything just to be productive. And there's so much intense competition in the workplace that devotees spend a lot of time at work, less time. It's a very inefficient arrangement. The US, at least there is a sense of being able to come back home and then focus on your sadhana after you come back home. Here it goes on and on, and it's just intense competition. It's just not feasible at all. So if you want to come to India, then retirement is what you should do, which means you retire and you come here. Yes, there can be certain facilities and arrangements that are more conducive if you're in the Dham. But if you're going to come here and work for a living, it's an extraordinarily difficult, tough environment to be in. So it goes for, and what I'm saying is it's basically on a case-by-case basis. I wouldn't really extend this as an advantage. I will not. It's as bad or worse, I would think. Yes, this is actually, I'm actually, our flat is being renovated. And because flat is being, I'm actually in MVT. So this is an MVT apartment. And you're seeing pictures which they have hung there. This is Sri Radha Govinda from Jaipur. Yeah. Mm. All right. So I think I'll stop here if there aren't any more questions. So thank you very much. We'll meet again the following week, and we will continue chapter 23.